Hey guys, it's Mario, aka LYME Warrior. I am here with one of my doctors and the founder and chief medical director of the American Center for Biological Medicine, along with Dr. Dick Tom. And we have the privilege to spend some time with him to set the record straight about chronic illness, whatever the chronic illness may be. So we're going to talk to Dr. Drobot and get some info out there for you guys. So Dr. Drobot, first of all, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I think one of the biggest questions that people have is what's the difference between Western medicine, naturopathic medicine, and biological medicine?
And I would say, honestly, I'm still searching for that answer because to me, medicine's medicine. Because I've studied, my first degree was exercise physiology. I got a science degree in exercise physiology. That was a million moons ago. And then I was going to go into, I guess we'd call it allopathic medicine or Western medicine. And I was talked out of it by a couple of my profs. And I didn't even know what naturopathic medicine was at that point. But after spending 4 years in naturopathic medical school, I learned that it was really medicine. You know, there wasn't that much delineation. By the time you're treating a patient, it's what toolbox are you going to use to treat the patient. And I think Western medicine, I think categorizing medicine is more for patients. And doctors kind of get tied up into it like it's their religion or something. But I think you learn one facet of one thing, and then a professional, when they're really a professional in their field, should search to learn about other things in their field to widen their scope. And so I would say conventional medicine is based on drugs and surgery. Naturopathic medicine seems to be based on supplements, lifestyle, and diet. And biological medicine is more of a European flair where they're incorporating technology with other medical systems. So you have Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and we're putting all these things together in some kind of a jumbled maze, and we're going to say, well, that is how we treat patients. And it's really hard to take a model for me personally and treat a patient with a model. Just like it's really hard for me to take a protocol and treat a patient with a protocol. Because I just don't see two patients that are the same.
Right. So you mentioned allopathic medicine. How do you feel that allopathic medicine has a role in healing a patient as opposed to holistic medicine?
I don't think allopathic medicine ever made a claim that it was going to heal chronic disease. You know, I don't think allopathic medicine, just like I don't think many of these medicines, and I don't think anybody could have predicted 30 years ago that we'd be in the place in health that we are today. So I think allopathic medicine it hangs its shingle on the fact that it can fix it does emergency medicine, and I think it does that remarkably well. Pediatrics, emergency medicine, orthopedics, I don't think that you can beat that. I don't think naturopathic medicine necessarily has a place in emergency medicine. I would find myself hard-pressed to say if you had in a car accident, come to my office because you're going to get better treatment than you will in a hospital. I mean, I think everything has its role, but chronic disease, that's kind of the new kid on the block when we're talking about cancer and chronic infections. And I mean, it's just a myriad of problems now that we're going through, and I don't think conventional medicine or allopathic medicine I don't think it's well equipped to do that job because by the time you have the patient, I mean, that's why it's chronic. It's been going on for a long period of time. You miss the acute part of it. The acute part of it could have been 30 years ago. It could have been 30 minutes ago. But when it's chronic, by that time, there's been a multi-system breakdown. And I just don't think that you can use conventional medicine. You can suppress maybe one part of those symptoms, but it's really not designed to take chronic disease and get you back to health. But I really, in my heart of hearts, don't feel like that's what the claim was anyways.
So I remember you saying to me that you wish people would be undertreated before they met you, but you feel like everybody comes to you overtreated. What does that mean?
It means we do a terrible job of promotion, probably. But I've never had to look for patients because it's always been referral based. I think by the time I see patients, there's been so much intervention. And so many people, and medicine is a practice, so you're supposed to practice. I get that. I've always just been of the philosophy that technology does a lot better at explaining things sometimes than a patient can. And so I've always been out in the world looking for technological advances that we can do, diagnostics or functional diagnostics, so that I can see which one of these systems, whether it's an immune system or it's a digestive system, which one of these things are really breaking down so that I can start with that. And a lot of people show up and the suitcase is this big with supplements and the medicine cabinet is this deep with drugs. And desperation breeds an interesting human part of nature, I think. And it just leads people to go down rabbit holes without much education and without a goal. I think they're trying to get healthy. I just don't know if you can describe how you're going to do that. And it's the one thing, medicine just doesn't do a good job of saying, here's the instruction book, and the patient is supposed to follow the instruction book, and they come out with this well-built cabinet at the end of it. And I really find for the patient base that I get to see, oftentimes we've done some things probably in medicine, or somebody has done some things in medicine, or the patient has been self-exploratory in medicine, and probably just put a few things under stress rather than letting kind of an organic process or supporting something instead of trying to treat everything.
I'm so glad that you brought up technology, because in my opinion, I think you are one of the most cutting-edge doctors we have right now when it comes to technology as treatment for chronic illness. So I guess my question, and I think I'm going to be asking this amongst many people, is how is technology used to help treat a patient in curing disease, not just curing symptomology?
Well, one of my specialties, if we want to say that, is pro athletes. And so I always came from a position where if you took somebody that was normal or above normal, I got paid to make them perform. So I was always on the lookout, because it was one of my passions and one of my interests, to find people that were athletes, but you had to make them in the top 5%. And what I realized was that biology and physiology is no different in a pro athlete than it is a normal person, than it is a chronically ill person. Everybody has a liver, everybody has a heart, everybody has an immune system. These parts don't change because a person is a certain profession or a certain race, or it just doesn't change. So I think for me, technology is far faster than biochemistry or supplementation. There's a lot out there in the athletic world about performance-enhancing drugs, and I just never went down that road because biochemistry is always sloppy. It's hard to figure out when you're taking 2 herbs or 2 medications or 2 supplements, then that's a new supplement. So I always went to technology to find machinery that could maybe do something for me that I found was a hole in my supplement regime, because I've tried it all. And I put a lot of effort and a lot of time into things, and when you get the opportunity to be a busy physician, you get to really see what works and what doesn't. And I know a lot of people have something that they want to say, well, this is my protocol. Well, there's not really a Drobot protocol, and I think that frustrates you anyways. It frustrates different people because they say, well, I want to learn what you know. And it's like, I learned what I know by watching what works and what doesn't work, but that was watching patients. That wasn't watching a supplement bottle and seeing what it did and what it didn't do.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because it's frustrating for me because I'm a control freak, and I know a lot of patients are a control freak. But what I'm learning from you is that there's a difference between healing arts and healing science, and you need a combination of both. And there's an art, there's almost an improvisation that needs to happen in order to find the protocol for that patient in particular. So it's interesting that you have this huge toolbox that it's like this whole palette of colors to help heal a patient. Do you feel that technology alone can actually cure a lot of chronic diseases?
I think technology can put a person in a different position to allow their physiology to heal themselves. And just like when you break an arm, I think you can use technology like a cast. And I think you can put an arm in a really good position. I don't know that you can keep rubbing arnica on it and you can get the same positioning in the body to actually heal that arm. So I could change this in another 20 years, but for me, technology is always the best way because I don't get side effects. Mm-hmm. I get effects because it's usually stimulating parts of the body to do something that a drug will stimulate that part, but then I have these 5 other parts called side effects. And I always want to go with effects. I don't really like side effects because they're hard to control. they're hard to mitigate, and the patient doesn't like them. So for me, technology, when you're using things like electrons and oxygen and cryosaunas and hyperthermia, for me, I think that you really do stimulation therapy, or you calm somebody down and you put them in a state where their body just naturally kind of takes over and it learns. And I think a lot of chronic diseases, the body for some reason has been preoccupied or some reason has forgot what it was supposed to do in the first place. And so if the physician kind of just re-educates, docere is supposed to mean, to teach. I'm supposed to educate you on what to do in order for you to kind of get your health back in balance. And I used to do that by coming to your house every single Sunday with my black bag and sitting down and saying, that can do good. But that would have been 5 years before you actually had some kind of pathology. I would have been able to see functionality. Some of my favorite doctors to watch of all time are veterinarians, because I honestly think they have the best skills of observation. They can see what's going on. The patients don't talk, so they just use technology and they use observation. And they forget a lot of what the owner says. But they get trained really well to actually, and you can talk to a veterinarian. It's interesting because they just have that, it's a sixth sense that I think you're supposed to have in medicine after a while, when you've seen enough things and you can kind of tell maybe what's not functioning in the body.
So that's kind of an amazing analogy. What do you feel like your art is as opposed to your science?
I think the art ends up learning. I went through, I'm a science guy, maybe by nature. I love technology, I love looking at the X's and O's of things, I love looking at the biochemistry of things. But it's a static. I think everybody has to understand that there's a static form. Science is quite static in the fact that you have to be able to merge different facets of science together, and I think that's what's called an art. I think an art is basically using everything that you know and creating your own thing with it. It's a multimodal way to treat. I think it's a very romantic way to treat, in the sense that you're always watching what happens and you're always doing something different. Science is based on, and we get ourselves in a lot of trouble in medicine because we say, we've got to do this, it's going to take 5 years, we're not going to change anything for 5 to 7 years. Well, that's like the technology industry taking a phone and saying, I want to study what this phone does, I'm not going to change anything about this phone for the next 10 years. You can imagine where that phone would be and where that company would be if they accepted that policy. And I do understand the double placebo trial, I do understand all that kind of stuff. I think it's valid, but I just don't think that we have the time. And I don't think patients stay still enough anymore with the advent of the internet and with all the supplementation. You don't have a patient that stays still in time and I can say, here's your blood pressure medicine, let's track it for 5 years. Well, they've done 500 things in that last 5 years now. Because there's a lot of self-treatment going on there, because I think there's a lack of education and there's a lack of resources as far as where they're getting their expertise.
Well, and it's funny, because of the lack of resources and everybody doing a lot of improvisation on their own to heal themselves, a lot of times that they end up feeling down and they end up feeling depressed that there is no way of getting better. And I have to say that you and Dr. Tom are the only two people that never say it won't get better. And you never say, this is the way it's going to be, this is the way it's going to be, you have to accept it. You have always continued to say that you're going to get better, you're going to get better, you're going to get better. And I've yet to hear you say that. I've yet to not hear you say that to every single patient that I see you come in contact with, unless, of course, it's a stage that's so late that it's inevitable. But I wanted to know, so we were talking about technology, but what role do you feel homeopathy has in playing in healing chronic illness? Because I know Dr. Tom is genius when it comes to homeopathy. So what would you say that has a role in healing chronic illness and disease?
Well, I think every modality has a role. I just think you have to put the person in the position to respond to the treatment. And for me, I can only tell you where I came from homeopathy, because that used to be a passion of mine when I went to medical school a million years ago, it seems now. And so when I got out, I used a lot of German instrumentation, which basically homeopathy is using physics. You're using a frequency or using some kind of information source to prompt the body to do something else. I mean, that's essentially what it is. You're dialing up a phone number, you're hoping the body answers that phone call and that it responds the correct way. And to me, I've seen over the last at least 10, 15 years that that's really hard now, because you're really trying to get a real subtle message into a nervous system that's on, it's not quiet. Homeopathy works, and it still works so well in little kids, and it still works that well in animals because their nervous systems are much more quiet. Nowadays, I don't think, for me anyways, I don't see people with really a nervous system that can take that signal. First of all, get a clear signal. Trying to get a clear signal to a brain, and then the brain is supposed to respond a different way. I just see people are maybe just a little bit too fatigued to handle that situation. You got to remember, homeopathy in its truest form was you gave one remedy, and you waited, and you waited, and the person was supposed to have all these responses to this one remedy, which essentially was a sugar pill imprinted with the frequency, or the sugar pill imprinted with, people like to call it the essence, or whatever you want to call it. To me, it's a message. It was a sugar pill with a message, and a drug has a message too. And chiropractors use alignment or use adjustment to send a message. Everybody is trying to send a message, but you're hoping that everything in the body is quiet enough that you get that message. And when we talk about chronic disease and we're saying, cancer or Lyme disease or something like that, I mean, cancer, for example, is your body's own cells. That's what it is. It's not some foreign invader that we can say. There's your body's immature cells, and it's supposed to send a message. And your immune system is supposed to be strong enough, and your nervous system is supposed to be strong enough that you can look in that and say, that doesn't really look like it needs to be here, so I think I'm going to take that out. And it's same as when we're looking at chronic infection nowadays. I mean, when we're looking at that, these things get to go unnoticed for so long in the body. And they get to cause their destruction by going unnoticed. The same as a cancer cell gets to form a tumor after like 10 years of just building. That didn't used to happen, in medicine, because you used to have a stronger immune system, and used to be much less noise in the nervous system. And your body always had a winter time, it seemed, to kind of go and do all this cleanup. And so you'd get big fevers, or you'd get some catharsis anyways, and you'd reset that system. And I think that nervous system is an important system. I know everybody concentrates on an immune system, but a nervous system is on all the time, and depending on what kind of power you can produce in a nervous system, it really determines how much treatment you can handle or what kind of treatment you can handle.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because some of the biggest questions I get are about, what your treatment is, what your treatment is, what your treatment is. And the thing that I'm learning through biological medicine is it's not so much what your treatment is, it's the place to start. And the fact that you bring up nervous system is a system that I've rarely seen in my journey that is even looked at by the doctors that I've seen, which has been many. And it really makes sense as a place to start. Why do you feel like for, certain individuals, that is the place to start, the nervous system?
People are just too tired to respond to treatment. And so we put these heavy treatments, we say, well, we're going to go ahead and do this big immune system treatment, and I think it's a great treatment. And I mean, I do treatments like that too, but I think the nervous system, it's like a battery, and it's going to determine what you can get out of that person and what you can't. And there's just not a way that you're going to turn that battery off and on unless you go and look and see where it is.
Why is it so overlooked?
Because it's hard to treat.
Why?
Because you can't really do that much with supplementation and medication. You look at some of the hardest things to treat. They're always neurological in nature, like ALS. Like dementia. You look at these things that affect the nervous system, and it's hard to get supplementation into a nervous system. It's hard to get medication into a nervous system because things aren't supposed to get into a nervous system. I think that's why Lyme disease is a real problem now, because things aren't supposed to get into a nervous system. There's not supposed to be loads of mercury and lead and cadmium around and basically go and cause a bunch of inflammation in the nervous system. I mean, that nervous system is supposed to be your primitive system. It's covered by a spinal cord and a membrane. I mean, the other thing we see a lot, concussion syndromes now in pro sports, they're so big, and what's the treatment for it? rest. It's like, what's always a treatment for the nervous system? You don't have one. I mean, because people just ignore it, saying, well, I don't have a way to track it other than an MRI, and an EKG, and it's like, well, by the time you've seen it, it's hard to treat, but the nervous system is going second by second. It's either deciding whether it's safe or it's deciding whether it's going to rest, digest, and repair. And I just think people haven't come up with great ways to treat it. And if they could, I think that everybody would start with the nervous system if they had a way to evaluate and treat it, because you're not going to find a more global system than a nervous system. You can't say that about an immune system. You can't say that about a digestive system. You can't say that about a circulatory system. I mean, a nervous system is your body's connection to every single cell in that body, and it's really going to direct traffic for all of those cells. And if you treat the nervous system first, which I kind of look at as a big box, and then you can throw the other systems in there, I think if you can control a nervous system, or at least some people need to be sedated, some people need to be, you need to get a little bit more sympathetic output out of them, but if you look at that nervous system and you treat it, and I've tried to treat against it, and I promise you I haven't done that well when I've tried it.
What does that mean?
You try to, in my first one, before I knew all this stuff, everybody says stress. I don't even understand what that word means, but people say stress, I've been under stress. I mean, everybody can say that, and anytime you get a diagnosis, it's stress right away, you know yourself. And then that itself, so you get this diagnosis, so you have these symptoms first, so that's a stress, because you're saying, what's going on with me? Then you get a diagnosis. Or maybe you don't, which is even more stressful.
Yep.
And so that causes a whole bunch, and then you're on this self-journey, which causes a whole bunch more stress, because everybody's talking to you, you're talking to doctors, you're talking to yourself more than you're talking to anybody else. And it's that chronic stress all the time that your body's saying something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. And I just haven't seen really a healthy person when they're put under that kind of workload. Just emotionally and psychologically, that's going to do that well with treatment.
Right. Well, you were mentioning stuff about digestion too, and what I've learned from you and Dr. Tom is basically everything is connected. I mean, there's no way one system can work without the other. So let's say we start getting the nervous system working.
Right.
How do you look at digestion, and how does food play in the role of healing? Because everybody goes on this whole food rampage of gluten-free, sugar-free, dairy-free, then they start becoming vegetarians. And how do we know what is good for ourselves and our digestion in order to help alleviate the, let's say, stress, for lack of a better word, on the digestive system and try to heal it?
Well, I think nowadays, whether you're doing an IgG food test or whether you're doing an electrodermal food test, I think for me, food is always going to be work. I haven't found a diet where you can put it into a muscle the size of a tennis court and it's like only does good things. If I go ahead and chop up organic broccoli and put it in one of my IV tubes, I mean, it's checking you out really quick. So it's always going to be something foreign. And I think the easiest thing that used to be, and we forget about diet, is that it does require input, it does require work. And then at the end of it, it's just carbohydrates, fats, proteins. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's essentially what food is.
So, I mean, I've had a lot of experiences with doctors when I would eat something and then I'd have a horrible response, which I know I get a lot of emails about this as well, that they'll eat something and immediately they'll have depression, or they'll feel like they've been drugged, or they feel like they're dizzy, or they have some crazy response to actual just food, even if it's healthy food. And everybody says that's impossible. I know you and Dr. Tom don't even flinch when you hear something like that. Why is that? Why is that something that you're used to? And what is that? What's going on?
Well, when a body is hurt or when a person's under stress, I mean, again, it kind of comes back to that nervous system where you have this huge sympathetic part of your nervous system, this fight or flight part of the nervous system. So if I'm hurt, like if you look at an animal that's hurt or an animal that's stressed, they just don't eat because they don't want to have that competition going in there. And so your body, if you do that to an animal, it usually just throws it up. I mean, it doesn't wait for this reaction. It's saying, well, I'm going to get that out of there right now because I've got something else on my plate that's, more important for survival than that input of calorie, because your body is designed to go without calorie for a long enough period of time. I mean, it just doesn't need that. It says, if I'm going to put the blood flow here to get away from danger, to get away from, then I'm not going to want to put all my blood flow here and break down this thing that this guy just put into me. Mm-hmm. I mean, your body always likes, in a stress situation, to handle its business internally. And when you keep putting external work on it, you're actually taking away. That's why fasting, everybody used to do fasting, cleanses, and you just really can't do too much of that anymore, because people really don't have the reserve to actually allow that fast or that cleanse, and people are far too toxic to expose themselves to that kind of stuff now. So when I look at diets and I say non-gluten, non-dairy, no sugar, I mean, you're just doing the least inflammatory diet. You really are. As far as not trying to cause your immune system any work, I think that's a good way. But you have to understand, you're not really treating anything, you're just taking work away, which is not a bad philosophy. When you do things like vegan, or you start to do some of these other things, I mean, you're really trying to use diet as a treatment. And unfortunately, the person oftentimes isn't able to do that kind of aggressive diet. That's like saying, if I have no energy, I think I'm just going to go pick up sprint racing and swimming, because I think that I can get my goals really fast, because I'm not good at it, so I'm going to do the most aggressive thing that's going to require the most output, and I hope it goes well. Well, it doesn't. It never kind of goes well like that, because it seems like a good idea at first, because it's a change. But then you have to respond to the treatment for a long enough period of time, and it's still just way too much work on your body.
So you're pro-elimination of the basic anti-inflammatories like gluten, sugar, dairy, but are you, from what I understand, you're not big on this huge elimination diet, because you're already weak and starved to begin with.
I'm not huge on, I think changes are good. I think aggression, in those changes, you just don't have this crystal ball where you're going to say 2 months later, I think it's going to be great. It's like 2 months later, you're going to be 30, 40 pounds down. Mm-hmm. The best biomarker for aging is lean body mass. That's where your body feels the most comfortable, is where you actually have muscle mass on it. Everybody knows that's one of the biggest things to do for aging, is increase lean body mass. That's one of the biggest treatments to do for cancer, is make sure somebody doesn't lose weight. Because once you start to use that, once you start to basically get your body into this evacuation mode that people think they're cleansing, which you are, but you're also using a lot of energy to run that cleanse. And if you start borrowing lean body mass, and I certainly am, I don't think that there's a diet, and again, a diet for me is kind of like the medical talk that we had at the start with allopath. Everybody uses it as a religion. There's no flexibility in it. There's no intelligence in it. You're just going to say, I'm going to be paleo right now, and you're going to do that for 12 months until it doesn't work, and then I'm going to be vegan right now, and you're going to do that for 12 months. And I always like the loading and unloading diets, where people are doing things, as a program. They're maybe doing a little vegan challenge, but it's only 3 weeks. You're not taking the body into big deficits like this. I'm certainly not going to say, hey, go and eat a bunch of double cheeseburgers, because that's going to do anything for you. I mean, elementary school kid can tell you that that's probably not the best thing to do for your health. So when you're not feeling well, you need to have fuel sources. Cleanest possible fuel, less amounts of waste. I mean, that's how you're always going to take a lot of work off the digestive tract, which means, again, your body can do something else with that energy.
Well, speaking of waste and cleansing, that brings actually my next topic up, which is detoxification. How important is detoxification, and what are the safety measures that need to be looked at when doing detoxification?
Well, detoxification, just like you got to build it up and then you got to break it down. And you got to build it up and you got to break it down. And I think the most important thing to look for detoxification is it might not be your first step. It's everybody's first go-to. They say, well, I must be toxic. Well, I don't even know what that means half the time. I mean, everybody's toxic. You can look at cord blood of babies and you can see people are born toxic. You're born with chemicals. Is that a cause to your problem? Sure. I'm not saying it isn't. Do you have maybe the energy, or do you have even a normal immune system or normal liver to go ahead and start flooding with a bunch of that? I don't think you should either. I think everybody is so individual that before we try to that's a very North American thing to say, well, I'm just going to strip this out like it's an oil change. It must be a dirty oil and dirty oil filter, so I just go and remove that. Well, it never seems to stop. You know, and I think people get themselves in a lot of trouble because, again, they just empty out the resources and they empty out bad stuff, whatever that is, whether they do a heavy metal challenge or, I mean, they're endless nowadays. But
well, you know, there's been more talk in the whole chronic illness world about genetic markers and this MTHFR DNA mutation, and then in other countries they're very big about, well, you have this genetic marker, so you need to find this pathway. How do you feel about genetic markers when it comes to detoxification, and are they as big of a deal as what's being presented now on all these websites? And
I think it's, again, to me, genetic markers, and I mean, they're genetic, so I mean, now that we have the ability to test for them, we kind of look at them. But that whole thing just still came from the Human Genome Project a long time ago, where you don't hear that much about that anymore. You know, because it was kind of a bust where we said, we're going to find all this variability in between people, and I'm going to find my Jeff Drobot pill, which is going to be exactly what my genes need. And we saw that genes do different things based on the environment. They do different things based on expression. And I think it's neat, you know, to go ahead and say, well, that's what's causing it, or, you know, I have a methylation problem, or, you know, a glutathione problem, or whatever problem you end up having. I mean, it doesn't really solve the fact that when I got started 15 years ago, I didn't see it. When that testing maybe wasn't available, I didn't see as many sick people as I do now. So it's really hard for me to go back and say, oh, there was just like breast cancer genes. It's like, that's really hard for me because genetics, if we look at like the 1900s, and it maybe was like 1 in 6, 7,000 people, and now it's 1 in 2. I mean, genetics just don't do that in that short a period of time. Environment has an influence on genetics, but so it's hard for me to believe.
Sorry, so do you go after that in a patient and try to treat that, or is it something that you just know, but you find a different way?
I think it's something that you know, because the treatment always seems to be more supplementation on a different system. It's like, well, if that system doesn't work, how do you know that one does?
And then therefore the nervous system kicks in again and starts being
you just start treating. You know, I think you can look at everything. I think it's good to get a lot of assessment done, but I think you have to hold those pieces of paper on your desk, and you have to say, not any one of these are written in stone. I can't find, like I said with that broken arm, I'm not going to see that fracture on the x-ray. You know, it's not going to be a solitary event. So I think you just have to be open and not kind of hinge it on this one lab test. It is just a small moment of time. You know, it's a very small moment in time. Most lab tests are pretty static tests. And so you get it tested today, you get it tested a month from now, and it can be remarkably different, especially if you treat it in the right or the wrong way.
You know, you were mentioning that we're born in a toxic world and you're born with chemicals and all that. But so I'm wondering, in today's world of toxicity and lack of nutrition and overabundance of GMO foods, how do we even begin to pick the best food sources that will aid in healing the nervous system, the digestive system, the endocrine system, the immune system? Where do you look as a doctor?
I mean, I think you still have to look at rotation. You know, I think rotation, as a doctor, you're always saying, you know, and if we are really going on, again, this genetics theory and this, I'm Ukrainian. I would find it hard to believe that I've survived this long because a banana is good for me. I mean, I don't really think that my genetics, I mean, it's funny because when you go to zoos, I don't see them saying, hey, this banana has unbelievable amounts of nutrients, and go throw that bear a bunch of bananas. You know what that zookeeper's going to do? He's going to kick you right out of that zoo, because he's going to say, I feed that bear those bananas. And that bear is going to get sick, because that bear will eat those bananas. I have no doubt about that. But bears eat bear food. Ukrainians eat Ukrainian food. So I think it's just better, and we can still get that way when we study like the work of Price Pottinger, or we go and look at like the rest of these studies. It really wasn't this miracle diet. It was like the people ate simply what the people were eating for a long period of time and survived for a long period of time. You know, every time I see like a new superfood or I see people do these diets, you know, I always go back to that zookeeper and say, I don't know if my great-great-grandpa, I don't think he had any problems other than maybe he cut his leg off in a combine and that pretty much was your way to check out or it was sanitation. But I know he didn't get that way on superfoods, so I think it's good to have a varied diet. I'm always big for varied diets and seasonal eating and basically eating from locally and trying to get the most minerals because you're never going to be perfect. But again, food is work, and you can do IgGs or IgE blood tests to see what antibodies you form to certain foods, and that all those tests again are designed to get you to rotate your food. If there's something that you're eating and it's causing an immune response because you've eaten it for 365 days and you probably were supposed to eat it for 90, then maybe take a little break off it. But to me, that's no different than you give me the best book that you've ever read, and you say this is the greatest book, and then I read it. And then you say, oh no, you read it again. And I read it, and I might enjoy it the second time. But pretty sure by the time 9 months goes by and I'm still reading that book over and over, it turns into pathology pretty soon. Could have been my favorite book too, when I started out. And so I don't think the body is designed to do anything in a repeated fashion, whether you say it's the greatest thing or not. It could start as the greatest thing. I can't do that with an exercise program either. I can't just say, I'm going to go run around the block for a mile. And then in 6 months I'm saying, I wonder why I don't feel as good. My times aren't any better. And it's because your body adapts to certain things. Mm-hmm. It's always supposed to be challenged. It's always supposed to be doing something different. And then it always stayed on guard with the environment.
So Italians should keep that in mind when they're eliminating pasta.
Well, the trouble,
from their
I
diet.
think everybody cries them because they say, well, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and put this big thing of pasta. And then you have to say, oh, wait. That's not the same grain that you had. We accidentally changed that grain. And I think that's really hard for the public to look at because they pick up a tomato and they pick up a tomato. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, those tomatoes, the one that's genetically modified and the one that's not, aren't even close to the same foods. They're very different foods with very different responses on the immune system, but they sure look alike. And I think that's a little bit of the fleecing of the public. But our population has boomed in the last 50 years, and it's really hard to tell a farmer nowadays to just go ahead and rest their field.
Right.
Say, hey, we're going to rest your field for that period of a year so that we can get all the mineralization back into the diet.
Yeah, I can't help to think if you're putting genetically modified food in your body, you're genetically modifying yourself in some fashion.
Well, you're experimenting.
Yeah.
But I think we're finding in a lot of things nowadays, when we go ahead and we turn radiation from cell phones up, I think we're experimenting. Mm-hmm. I think when we're experimenting with medication, we're experimenting with supplementation. We're experimenting with everything. And I just haven't really realized why we don't get the point that maybe it's not that good. It's not like we're saving any money in healthcare. Everybody's spending so much more money just because, it's not like technology where we're actually getting a benefit from all this. We're getting it's a detrimental effect on the population.
So, electromagnetic toxicity, basically you just brought that up. So I want to ask you another question about toxicity because it's, on my journey, sometimes a lot of doctors started with chelation.
Right.
And, avoiding electromagnetic toxicity. So do you feel like chelation has a place in healing a patient? And if so, do you feel that this is the place to start this heavy metal detoxification? Because there's a lot of misconception that people have out there about chelation.
I don't think there's a person probably walking the planet that doesn't have increased levels of lead, mercury, cadmium, aluminum. These are all heavy metals. Your cells do not like them, your immune system doesn't like them, and your nervous system doesn't like them. Did that make you sick? For some people, it made them real sick. And so chelation is always, for me, a second treatment. If you can't prep the body first, and when you chelate, you've got to go and re-expose the person to those metals. It's not like you get a magic pill and it goes in there and it makes the mercury disappear. You got to go and strip that mercury back through a liver, through a kidney, through a digestive tract, through lymphatics. So really, you're re-exposing people to heavy metals. And I used to do that just because I used to experiment, and you can make somebody sick that's already sick, and you can put those organs under a lot of work. So I really think people should all chelate. I mean, I think it's a good idea because it's bioaccumulating, and it's going to affect you sooner or later. And I think we see that with the nervous system problems that we already have with people's memory and dementia, and you go on. I just don't think that that's a first treatment to do to somebody, because you're really taking somebody, at least my patients, they might be different for other people's patients. I mean, but for my patient subset, they're really sick. And I mean, I'm not going to say that the heavy metals don't have a part of it, because I think heavy metals have a big part of chronic illness, just like I think toxicity has a big part of chronic illness. But going and making those organs ready, going to look at the organs of elimination and saying, this person's really, I mean, you've got to build a couple highways here if you're going to put those tanker trucks back on them and get them out of the body. And I think for me, there's a preparation that goes along with that.
But do you believe the body can chelate itself once you're
I think it's
helping
hard.
the nervous system and
I think
digestive
it's hard.
system?
I mean, it's. I think you're able to tolerate things a lot better. It's kind of like, do I think any mom is going to really like their newborn baby after 7 days of like no sleep? Nope. I mean, I have little kids. I think that's really hard. But you give me 2 more days, I can tolerate that, no problem. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people. I think that's the controversy that we get into sometimes with alternative medicine, was we say, well, that one root canal, or that one amalgam, or that one spiral, or whatever we wanted to say. I think it's hard to say, well, that was the one thing that did it, because that's a very allopathic way to look at things, to say, well, I need a causative factor. I need some kind of agent so I can go in and get it. It's like, no, that works if you have a splinter in your toe. You can go in there and you can pull a splinter out, and I promise you, then the body actually goes ahead and repairs it. But with heavy metals, they're heavy. They get stuck in spaces they shouldn't get stuck, so I think you get that after. That's a treatment.
So you mentioned dental health. How important is dental health in the whole realm of biological medicine?
Well, I think the mouth is an open cavity, and I don't think that's ever going to change. And I think your body probably has a pretty amazing immune system in your mouth, because it's evolved for a long period of time and it's been an open cavity. And for me, dental work, because it's not really a variable piece of work for your body. It's not even like stress where you can go to sleep and you're out of the stress. It's going to be a problem because it's there 24/7. And it's going to be a hole in the bucket. And for some people, whether you have a cavitation or whether you have, a root canal or whatever you end up having, I have seen, one of those things cause a whole bunch of problems. And I think they're a big problem because they're 24/7, and because the mouth is so protected by the body, and once you kind of invade that mouth and you go ahead and you put foreign bodies in there and it doesn't set like you were supposed to, and I don't think any dentist goes in there to really cause a problem. I just don't think we look at, or we do dentistry in any other form than cosmetic dentistry, where we're saying, well, your mouth does have something to do with your health. I think we say, well, your mouth has something to do with your structure. But I'm not going to say that it's going to be from here on down, it's going to do anything. And I think biological medicine has done a masterful job at identifying that the mouth does actually belong to the body, and it does play a big part in people's health when you go ahead and you mess it up.
So what kind of testing do you think helps you as a doctor when treating a patient? Because you were saying when you're looking at blood work, it's just like a snapshot in time. So what is your biggest help to try to help a patient? What kind of testing would you say?
Well, I always like functional testing. I always like, people like to do batteries of tests, so whether they do blood work, and they don't quite understand that that's only really 5 pints, and the blood is so nicely controlled by your brain that it's not going to be the first thing to change. You go ask any kind of doctor and they'll tell you, Jim just had his blood work done last year and it looked great, and now he's got stage 4. It's like, okay, well, obviously that blood work wasn't the most accurate thing, and even the New England Journal of Medicine says it's not the most accurate thing. When we look at salivary tests and stool tests and heavy metal tests and food tests, I think those are all valuable. I certainly, my preference is always what I have in the clinic, and that's because I can do repeatable testing. I can do functional testing like the thermography, I can do functional testing like heart rate variabilities, and I can put the person under a treatment and I can see how they respond to treatment. Mm-hmm. So my favorite test is always the one that's going to tell me the most about the patient. And sometimes that changes for me. Tests like salivary hormone tests and heavy metal tests, you still have that moment in time, and I never look at the first test as an important test. I always look at the second test as the most important test to see if the treatment we actually did anything or not. But it's always such it's a long time. You know, you have to wait a month or you wait 3 months, and by that time, you know, you've lost 2 months of time.
Yeah, and it's amazing because you see patients come in with like an entire book full of blood lab work. So to see that you guys are open to all this kind of testing opens the door to help diagnostically figuring out what's going on. But something that I also recognized in you and Dr. Tom is that even when you are looking at blood work, you don't look at the reference range. A lot of times you look at the ratio of things. Like you look at blood work differently than any doctor I've ever worked with. So even though it's a snapshot in time, you're still looking at it in a different way than most Western doctors have even done, in my experience.
You know, I think you have to look at norms. And I think you have to understand that that's normal. Mm-hmm. Nobody said that's good. You know, people say, oh, I'm going to give you, because a lot of doctors refer to me to actually look at their patients and say maybe they missed something. And you're looking at like a test, and you have this really sick person. And you have this test, and you say, well, it's normal. It's like, the hormones are just, look, there's no change. They're just right here. And I say, well, they should look at the person, and you should see the hormones. You should see the body responding much differently. That's not a normal person. So we can't look at these lab tests and say, well, that's supposed to be normal because it doesn't fit the picture that you're looking at. I want to see these hormones elevated because that's the only way that person's going to get out of that jam. If those hormones stay normal or they stay low normal, I don't see a way that person's going to get out of that. And then everybody says, oh, wow, okay, that's what's going on. And it's like, well, you had all those tests in front of you. I don't know how you would take these norms and apply it to that person and say everything looks normal, and then you're looking at the person and you're like, that person looks like crap. So there's no way that these tests can be normal. It's like, no, the tests are exactly what they look at. You're just not interpreting the patient and the test. Every doctor seems, as soon as they get a piece of paper, they look at the piece of paper, they forget the person. It's like, that doesn't work either.
Well, you use the word reserve a lot. I know with me and a lot of my friends that I've sent to the clinic. What does that mean? What does reserve mean? Building the reserve. What does that mean?
It really means, you know, at the end of the day, it means building electrons and oxygen so that you can heal. You know, your body, it doesn't, once you become low, it doesn't go from low to normal. I mean, everything that heals, when it goes low, it needs to go through an inflammatory cycle or heightened sense of cycle, and then it'll drop back down to normal. And everybody's seen that with a sprained ankle. Mm-hmm. You don't just sprain your ankle, it doesn't swell, and then it goes back to normal. Sprain your ankle, it swells. That swelling causes your nervous system to deliver a lot more nutrients and a lot more electrons by causing this inflammatory cycle. And then after a couple weeks of that, because it had to heighten that response, it goes back down to normal. And that's, when I'm looking at reserve function, I'm seeing, can that person actually, can they give me some mileage for this treatment I'm about to put them through? Are they going to respond to treatment? Or am I going to take this bank account, make another withdrawal, because I'm going to make an investment with the treatment, and I'm hoping that I'm going to make an investment that's actually going to give me a good treatment response. But if that person doesn't have anything in that account to even make that investment, then I know it's always